Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Teamwork a Better Way. I'm Christian Napier, and I am joined by the very colorful Spencer Horn. Spencer, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Yes, and I have a little more color in my face than usual.
And in your shirt is amazing. It's got all the patterns.
Yes, little paisleys. We got gray, we got red, we got blue. Yes, I like this shirt.
Yeah, well, you got to tell me what you were up to this week because I understand that you went to one of the world's most wonderful cities.
Yeah, San Diego, beautiful, beautiful place. So I was there last week, which was wonderful. Got to sit out on the beach in Coronado. And this week, Jan and I went down. I was speaking at a conference, uh, you know, right there in downtown San Diego. But we went to Torrey Pines State Beach, right there by La Jolla, right between Del Mar and La Jolla, in this just beautiful little spot. There are peregrine falcons being hatched, on those cliffs up there above, Torrey Pines, and everybody's, taking pictures, and then you've got those paragliders, whatever those are called. It's just beautiful sun, and so I fell asleep on the beach. I wasn't fully uncovered, had some shorts on and a long sleeve shirt, but my face got fried.
I hope you're recovering okay.
Yeah, just some peeling here and there, but that was not
Yeah,
much.
but it looks good. You look good with a tan. Looks lovely. Well, I was telling you just before we came on air here that I ran into a couple of your National Speakers Association buddies, Hall of Fame speakers down in Las Vegas, and it was by chance going to one of your favorite
My
restaurants.
favorite restaurant, yeah, Din Tai Fung. That's so awesome. I'll have to talk to him about that.
And ran into two former guests. Uh, Jason Hewlett, amazing individual and performer, and then Ty Bennett, not in Din Tai Fung. I actually ran into him at the airport there in Las Vegas, but it was great to see some of your colleagues there in Las Vegas.
And you were there with some technology whiz bang
I
thing.
was there for Google Next, so that's Google's huge annual conference. So I was down there for Google Next, and then I went from there uh, back to Philadelphia. So I was in Philadelphia, just got back Wednesday for the National Association of State CIOs. That's a conference that's put on.
One of my
And
favorite places to go. Great food in Philly.
yeah, it was wonderful. So I was asked to speak on AI there. So I gave a little speech there. But enough about all this fun stuff that we're doing because really the highlight of our week is right now. This week
Yeah.
is capping off on a high note. So we've got an amazing guest here joining us. And Spencer, why don't you do the honors and introduce him to our
Yeah,
listeners?
so I'm going to bring him up on the screen. We've got Ethan Nash with us today, who is a second generation CEO of Nash Consulting, a 30-year-old leadership and organizational development firm that helps organizations build healthy, high-performing workplaces while improving the lives of the people who work in them. That is our whole theme on this show, isn't it? So we were so excited when we were introduced to Ethan, and he holds an MS in organizational performance with a decade of management experience from frontline supervision to senior leadership. Always great to cut your teeth in the real world and not just in academia, right, Christian? And
Absolutely.
and he's had nearly a decade of coaching and consulting leaders and teams across a wide range of organizations. And Ethan is known for translating psychology and leadership theory into practical skills teams can use immediately. Out the door and on the floor is what we like to say, right? And his work emphasizes trust, honest candor, and shared behavioral commitments grounded in systems thinking. I want to hear all about that. And he partners with organizations ranging from small nonprofits to some of the largest public institutions in the Pacific Northwest. He's also the co host of Managing the Mind and Heart podcast, a writer and speaker on workplace culture, and outside of work, a mountaineer and ultra endurance athlete. Dude, I wish I love to climb mountains. I'm going to be going to Olympia National Park, and I've wanted to do the Cascades, but such beautiful mountains. I just wish I could even keep up with that. But Born and raised in Washington State, you have such beautiful outdoors up there. Lives in Seattle with his lovely wife and daughter. Welcome to our show today, Ethan. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you. Yeah, Spencer, Christian, good to be with you both. And can I just say that I agree with Spencer on your shirt, or sorry, Christian on your shirt, Spencer. Like, just a really nice shirt. I just got to say that. So,
Well,
anyways, good to be with you too.
and anything I get that's nice like this, it's usually my wife's doing. But I didn't get this in Las Vegas, Christian. So, but today's episode, trust to action, skills that make teams actually work, and that's a great one. Just complimenting somebody, a stranger, it makes me feel so good. So thank you for the compliment, and we're glad to have you here. So why do so many teams, Ethan, understand concepts like trust and communication, yet they struggle in that day-to-day interaction? I mean, it's just we understand what trust and communication is, but it seems that there's still problems. Why does that happen, in your opinion?
Mm. Because from what I've seen, agreement on concepts isn't the same thing as alignment on behaviors, right? Like alignment on behaviors is actually how we create what I would just call collective group intelligence, right? So, for example, teams say and agree that, hey, we want trust, we want to behave in a way that earns trust, and they might even take that a step further and say, well, what is trust? It's character and competence combined, which is great. Or they say, hey, we want to have open communication, we want to have psychological safety, we want to be able to disagree with each other, and everybody nods their heads and say that's great and we're committed to that. But I mean, at the end of the day, those are just words unless we define what they actually look like behaviorally or in terms of skill sets. And the reality is, when we say things like trust or, respect in the workplace or things of that nature, we all have slightly different definitions of what that means and what that looks like. So we walk around with our own definitions, and somebody thinks respect is giving me direct, honest, unsolicited feedback because, respect is honesty. But the person receiving that feedback is thinking that's disrespectful because a respectful person would wait until I asked for feedback. So I think it's just the gap between idea and concept and what those look like behaviorally, and then earning alignment on those behaviors.
I love that answer so much. I mean, some person, it's like you're talking about love languages, Ethan, right?
Right.
I mean, I'm thinking I'm giving trust by candor, and the other one's like, oh, you're totally disrespecting me. That's breaking trust. And it's so right. I think that's really the perfect answer. So the question then becomes, how do you create that alignment? And how do you create that how do you do the defining? I think one of the things that I see most organizations skip is creating actually agreements, right? Where they sit down and say, and actually define those. But how do you keep that up? Because the organizations are dynamic, people are dynamic. I mean, it seems like it's going to be an ongoing labor.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I would agree that it is an ongoing labor, right? Teams are dynamic, our environment's dynamic, the economy's dynamic, right? We have to adjust and build new commitments to the evolving environment. But I think I mean, you put it how I would put it, which is yes, we have to actually reach agreement. Now, that sounds pretty simple in concept and practice, maybe a little bit more complicated, but really what I encourage teams to do is engage in a common commitment process. And what that often looks like is, hey, let's define what matters for our team. And I'm often in my work focusing on team dynamics. So, relationally, what does a healthy team look like? And people always come up with things like, again, trust, psychological safety, and things like that. And then I think the process from there, again, is just taking those concepts and breaking them down behaviorally. And then, I'm happy to speak about how a team would then kind of sustain those commitments. But do you mind if can I tell a story? Can I tell a quick story? Is that all right with
Please
you
go
guys?
right
Please
ahead.
do.
All right.
We love
Yes.
Like
stories.
stories? All right, good. So, I had an employee in a previous job that I was in, and this employee, he basically kept getting feedback from his colleagues that he was being a jerk. And so he was getting feedback like, hey, you're disrespectful, you're hard to work with. And he was a really smart guy, a high performer, but people just didn't want to collaborate with him. And so it escalated to me. And so I asked him, hey, why do you think people feel that way about you? And he said, I don't know. And I said, okay, well, honestly, like, I don't really care what people mean in terms of being a jerk. And I don't even really know what that means. What I care about is that people want to work with you and that people aren't coming to me to complain about you. I could kind of be direct with him like this. And so I asked him, what is the opposite of a jerk then? And he said, well, I guess somebody that is respectful. And I said, great. Okay. So what does a respectful person do? Like, what do they actually do? And that's where things started to shift with him. He said, well, I guess they wouldn't interrupt people. They don't raise their voice at people. And so I said, okay, great. Now we have two specific behaviors that you can start doing. And then I played along. And we landed on things like, when you're in a group with people, do airtime math. Okay, so there's 4 of you in this group. How much of the airtime is yours? About 25%. Great, use that amount. How about asking 2 questions before you disagree with somebody? How about not being on your phone when other people are talking? So all of a sudden, he had 5 actual behaviors that he could start doing. And this is the gap, again, I think most teams have. We understand the concept of respect, but we need clarity on what that looks like in practice. So in working with a team on creating our commitments, I think it's a similar process. It's taking the high-level concept, it's breaking it down into behaviors, and then it's practicing them as actual skill sets together.
I love that you actually coached him on that process. I'm curious, with the suggestions, did he come up with those, or did you come up with those together?
In this case, it started with him, right? He came up with a few.
That's
And
excellent.
this,
Excellent.
yeah.
Because now he's more committed to his idea of what it means to not be a jerk, right? So focusing on the engaged team member that's respected. I love that. So, Christian, I'm
Absolutely.
sorry.
Yeah, that's a really, really great example. And one of the things that I really like about it is the way that you framed it and presented to us. The complaints that were coming to you were complaints of character. Like, this person's a jerk, right? It's hard to address character.
Yeah.
But when you transform or reframe it to, let's focus on behavior, then all of a sudden the cognitive dissonance in this person's mind starts to fall away, because he's thinking, I'm not a jerk, but he's behaving like a jerk, right? But he doesn't see it. And then when you started asking these questions, then he started to identify, specific things that he could work on that would help other people not perceive him as a jerk. So I thought that was actually really, really brilliant. And I want to know, what the outcome of this story is, because it's like, okay, he identified 5 different things that he could potentially work on. How does he actually go about doing it? Because it's one thing to kind of recognize, like, okay, these are things that I need to do. But sometimes it's difficult to follow through and actually work on those things, and you stumble as you go through that process. So I'm curious, with this person, how did you actually, or did it even happen? Did the person change behaviors? If so, what was the impact? If not, what was the impact? Can you kind of give us the rest of the story?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, he's still a jerk. No, I'm just kidding. Of course. No. It that's a really good question. And by the way, maybe we'll circle back to this later, but yeah, just the idea that there's very few people in the world that actually think they're a jerk. So getting, feedback about someone's character that's a jerk, we're automatically going to be resistant. It's going to build more resentment, and we might end up behaving more like the thing people are asking us to stop behaving like. So to finish this story, one of my favorite sayings, I can't remember who said it, is if everything is your focus, then nothing is. So in this conversation with this guy, we identified 5 behaviors. And it wasn't just like, hey, here are 5 behaviors. Good luck, try your best. It was with this guy, it was like, hey, this is what you're focused on over the next 90 days, over the next 3 months, or whatever it is. Right. And you know what? I want to support you through this because behavioral change is not easy. I've been through my own behavioral change before and I'm still going through it. And so on our bi-weekly one-on-one, let's talk about when you've put this into practice, maybe some missteps you've had, because setbacks is always part of the experience. But with this person, and I think in general when we're doing coaching, is like focus on just a couple of those behaviors at a time, if not just one. So for the next 2 weeks, your primary goal is to just not interrupt. Like just practice that for a week or two. How does that feel? And then let's layer on another behavior for a couple more weeks. And I think that is far more sustainable than here are 10 things, good luck. So I don't know. What do you guys think about that as far
So
as?
here's what I do. So I have a process. It's called the daily questions. I mean, Marshall Goldsmith talks about it. He learned it from other coaches. Probably goes all the way back to like Ben Franklin, right, when he was doing his his self improvement. But you instead of saying not interrupt, what's the behavior you want instead? Remember, it is wait patiently before speaking, or
Great.
make sure that I'm taking doing the air math. So stated in those positive terms, like you stated, and I have a spreadsheet. And what you do is you rate yourself every day on a scale from 1 to 10. So today, did I do my best to wait patiently before responding? On a scale from 1 to 10, being completely honest with yourself. And and when you struggle, and you're going to, I mean, you're not going to do it perfectly because you're just starting. The request is, instead of, oh my gosh, I failed, instead of self-judgment, replace that with curiosity. It's found that curiosity is really one of the most powerful behavior changing mechanisms that we have. Willpower is not enough. But if we say, why did I struggle paying attention today? Now it's all about the self-awareness, right? Because before we didn't have this self-awareness because we have this fundamental attribution error, right? We judge our behavior as, well, the reason why I was being a jerk was they deserved it and they needed it. But everybody else, when they do the same thing we do, they're doing it because they're actually a jerk. But that's we judge ourselves based on our intentions, and everybody else based on their impact, and that's that fundamental attribution error. But if you can measure every day, okay, I had a terrible day. I was a 3 today. Why did I struggle? The curiosity gets your mind focused on what was going on. It creates awareness, and you're focused on the behavior you want, and you're learning about where and how and why you're struggling. And it is a powerful force to start getting those shifts happening. And you're doing exactly that. I mean, I put a little a framework around it that on top of what you just did so brilliantly.
Yeah, I love that. I love that idea. I think that would actually take this to kind of the next level of actually, I mean, being able to track, first off, to have be
It
able to
is
look at your
subjective, right?
progress.
It's subjective, but
Yeah.
you still are adding a value to it. So if you're at, hey, I'm at patiently listening at 5, which I just interrupted you, but the goal is after 3 weeks, maybe you're at an 8. Now you can work on something else.
Yeah, I like that. Thanks for adding that. I would also just briefly add that, or echo, you're also getting at something a little bit deeper there, which is kind of the self-awareness, curiosity, which is a key part. It's not just, hey, start doing these behaviors, right? Listen patiently, whatever. It's also, I think there's something deeper, which is there's a reason why someone is doing these things. And it's often it's also something deep that we have to kind of start unpacking over time and getting curious about, right? Is it that I want to feel respected and this is my way of showing that? And just being curious about that, I think that's powerful. Thanks.
So, Ethan, another question that I've got is when you're on this journey of self improvement, self awareness, whatnot, sometimes things seem to be going okay when things are going okay, but then a conflict may arise, something might happen, it could be unexpected, uh, and that adds pressure. And in those moments, sometimes our ability to improve our behaviors, it kind of falls by the wayside because we're just caught in the moment of the thing, and then we revert to the way that we always do things. And so I'm curious to hear from your perspective, like how can we work on these behaviors, but especially when we're operating under pressure, because uh, sometimes we just lose that awareness and curiosity when situations become stressful and we revert to old habits.
Yeah, yeah. What's the saying? How's the saying go? That we don't rise to the level of our training, we fall to the level of our habits, right? And so, yeah, in moments of tension and pressure, we revert back to our habits, which to me, it just means that we have to start building new habits, and that takes time. And if we're with a team and a group, that means giving each other some grace and patience as we're learning new habits. But not to sound too much like a one trick pony here, but maybe I am. I think this is why it comes back to not just having ideas and concepts that we want to start living by, but actually breaking those down into skills and behaviors, and then continuously practicing them until we build some muscle memory and they start becoming new habits. And so maybe I'll give you an example here, right? When someone, well, coming back to an earlier point that was made, when I need to give someone feedback and maybe I'm upset at them, maybe the tensions are high, it's very easy to get to back to those character words, right? You're incompetent, you're lazy, you're reckless, you are fill in the blank with a negative adjective there. And so I think we need a new framework that we can access in the moment. Do you mind if I share a framework for giving feedback as just an example here?
No, I think that's
Good.
absolutely perfect. I mean, because that's something that I think backfires a lot with people is giving feedback, and I'm so excited to also hear how you practice, because I think that's so key. We teach a principle, or we have a workshop, or somebody comes in and does a workshop, and we're like, okay, now we're going to be great. No, you got to
Mm.
actually build the habit and the muscle memory. So I'm totally excited to hear about this. Let's
Yeah,
roll.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. No, nobody changes behavior just because they showed up to a training one time, right? Like it takes ongoing work and practice. Um, so yeah, giving feedback. Okay, so we've established to avoid character words because character words are literally insulting to another person. Um, so remember my story earlier with the guy that was being told he was a jerk and stuff like that, being told he was disrespectful. Again, in his mind, that wasn't true. Um, and the feedback that he was getting, the problem with disrespectful and jerk is it's not specific, right? It doesn't actually communicate specifically what people want to see differently. All right. And so the tool, like I like to keep things super simple. So I know there's tons of gray area and nuance in this, and I'm sure we could poke holes in it, but let's just give a simple tool because when it comes to those moments when under pressure, we need something very simple to rely on. So the method that I like to use is just what we call the BIR method. It's probably nothing new. You've heard of it before, but the BIR method is simple. When I'm giving someone feedback, I focus on the behavior, the impact of that behavior, and the replacement behavior. So BIR. Now, when I'm in that intense moment and I've practiced this and kind of drilled BIR, it's much more likely I can remember BIR when I need to give this person feedback. So I'm giving someone feedback. The behavior is the thing that you actually saw or heard from that other person. So with my guy from earlier, the things that people were seeing and hearing were him raising his voice, him interrupting people, and things like that. Now, giving feedback on that, you see how different that is than giving feedback on you're a jerk,
Yeah, well,
right?
you even said to him, "I don't care what did you say that I don't care that people call you a jerk. I'm
Yeah.
focused on the behavior."
Exactly. So behavior, and then the impact of that behavior, right? The impact of that behavior could be real, like it's already happened, or it could be potential. And with our guy, the impact of that behavior was both real and potential, which is you're kind of it's shutting down creativity. People don't want to speak up. People don't want to collaborate with you. That's a real impact. And then a replacement behavior is what you would like to see them do instead. And coming back to your earlier point, this is a great opportunity not to just dictate the behaviors you think they should do, but to invite curiosity. What would be a replacement behavior here? Right? Rather than interrupting, what is something you could do instead?
Yeah, and that gets
Right?
their creativity rolling, and the ownership
Yeah.
is with them instead of with you. So that's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, this is a simple tool. We can remember BIR, and with I will say with anytime we were building kind of collective skill sets like the BIR method, um, it's not just hey, let's commit to this, let's learn it once. Like we actually have to create like a relationship team charter. All right, we're committing to giving feedback well. Here's what we're committing to in terms of how we're going to give it. And then as a group, if you really actually want to be committed to this stuff, I mean, I will keep this simple. That group needs to repeat, meaning practice, meaning like setting aside time weekly or monthly in which you review one of these skills and you role play it together. You have scenarios, right? You discuss it. So repeat. The other thing is measure. What you measure, you get more of. Meaning, our performance reviews are actually based on us showing up in this way and putting these skills into practice. And then as a leader, reward people, right? When you see people using these skills and putting them into practice, especially under times of tension, don't miss an opportunity to give that person some public recognition, right? Because what you as a leader reward publicly is what tends to get repeated. And then last but not least is actually, I'll just leave it there, right? Repeat, measure, reward. And this actually starts to become a group collective habit over time.
Okay, Ethan, would you do me a favor? So you that's great model for feedback. So you've had the BIR conversation. Here's the behavior. Here's the impact. What is the behavior that you want instead? So in a sense, you're having them solve their own behavioral issue, which is wonderful. Then what? I mean, because now you've got to get into okay, so you got to agree with their assessment. All right, here's what I want instead. They might say, well, I'll just try harder. Well, that's not really that's not a good answer. But so they come up with an answer that you like. Well, here's what I want. Then what? I mean, what's the plan? How often do you meet with them? How do you measure that, and so forth?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you've kind of landed on an agreement of how they'll start showing up instead, how do you
Yes,
follow that?
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if we're looking at kind of at the group commitment level, we'll take it there. Then when it comes to measure, again, I like to keep it simple, which is like quarterly, we give each other as teammates an assessment on the skills and commitments that we've agreed to. Right. And sometimes that's just like a 1 through 5. So, Spencer, over the last month, how have I seen you show up in terms of this way of giving feedback? I'll give you a 4 out of 5 and I'll write some comments of why that is. And so just that kind of peer feedback, that measurement is a simple way to go about it. Right. And at the same time, everybody's going to have their specific growth areas that they're working on. Right. Some people on their team are really already pretty natural at giving feedback in this way, and other people have some growth areas to work on. And I think that's why it's on the manager to kind of manage to the unique person, right? And figure out what are their specific replacement behaviors that they might need and stick with them through that, right? Yeah.
I
But I'm
love.
also curious, I know you work on a lot of measurement and things like that. I'm looking to learn from you guys as well. So, how might you approach that? Or any ideas
That
for me?
Yeah, great question. One of the things that I use is a team diagnostic.
Hmm.
and they're around behaviors of productivity. And there's 7 measures that we look at there, and then 7 measures of culture or that enable us
Hmm.
to sustain productivity. The but so you got the team diagnostic, um, but sometimes teams overestimate themselves, right? And so there's actually
Yeah.
a 360 that you could do. So you can say, all right,
Mm-hmm.
this team thinks they're doing so well, but they don't have this self awareness. You could have, just like you're giving feedback, which I love, and I want to hear more about your assessment for peers. But you could do a team 360, of
Mm-hmm.
course, individual 360s, and I think a lot of organizations do those wrong. They use them as a hammer. They really need to be used in a way uh, for self awareness, but also that is empowering and you know, not because we have. I mean, I'd
Yeah.
love to see them done proactively instead of when we just have a problem. And I love,
Right.
and that's what I hear you doing, which I think is fantastic. We do this quarterly. We're actually doing little assessments as we go, and I think that's a really powerful process and an idea, Ethan, because
Mm.
360s are done, like I say, when there's a need for remediation, and that's when then people get defensive. And I mean, there needs to be a time when you do that. But what if you did those 360s regularly?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know.
I mean, I'm a big believer in that. Like it's systematic. Again, what you measure, you get more of. If quarterly we are measuring this, we're going to be paying more attention to that.
Yeah. And I have what's called a team leader view, which I will happily send to you, and it's
Yeah.
it's your perspective of the team, so you can kind of see how the model works. And I use that with teams, and it's just a start, but it's multiple layers of evaluation that is super helpful. But I really want to get your perspective on systems thinking,
Mm.
right? You talk about systems thinking, and I'll tell you personally, as a leader of businesses in the past, I failed in some cases because I failed to take into account system dynamics.
Mm.
Typically I'm working with individuals and I ignored the overall system. I mean, I'd really like to hear your take on what is systems thinking and how does that impact the team and team engagement and team performance.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer that systems thinking in general is a leader's best friend, and I think it's using systems thinking is the difference between playing whack a mole with problems that crop up versus actually solving those problems at the root in a sustainable way, right? So systems thinking is just seeing kind of the whole and recognizing that there are no parts that are operating independent, right? They're all interconnected, and adjusting, tweaking one part of the system will always have ripple effects elsewhere in the system. And so then I think the the cool thing about that is once we recognize that, it gives us the power to be more intentional about the tweaks that we make or don't make once we see kind of the system as a whole. I'm a big fan, again, coming back to it. I love simple frameworks, simple models, but I'm a big fan of the framework called the waterline model. Are you familiar with the waterline model at all?
I'm not. Christian, are you?
No.
Is that where the
And
boat has the holes at a certain
teach us
level?
today.
I don't I'm not sure what you're talking about, but yeah, no. Uh, you can Google it. This the waterline model. It's easier to explain with a visual, but just think of it this way for our listeners out there: is um, when we are aiming, when we see a problem show up, it shows up what we call above the waterline, and there
Yes.
are then levels below the water in which we could intervene. And it is natural for us as humans, I think, before we're considering the system, to try to resolve the issue at the lowest level before below the water line. But what we really want to do is resolve it closest to the water line, because when we resolve it closest to the water line, it trickles down. All right, let me get more practical and specific with that. So we're seeing, let's just take a low performing individual in general, um, and maybe even struggling with receiving feedback well, things like that. our natural instinct is to say there is something wrong with that individual. We need to give them training, right? We need to give them new skill sets. Yet there's a body of research that indicates that when there is a performance issue, roughly 70 to 80% of it is due to factors within the structure of the group process rather than the individual's skill set or knowledge or mindset or aptitude themselves. And so what we would do, or what I would do as a leader, is I would look at the structure level and the group process level and see if there are gaps there that I could close that would help resolve these issues. So for example, at the structural level, these are things like, are our goals clear? Do we all understand our goals as an organization or as a unit? Are expectations clear for people? Right? Are decision-making authority and processes clear? Right? And it's solving these things that have positive ripple effects down the line. And it tends to, when we solve those, it tends to make it so those performance problems are not cropping up as often because we've solved at the structure. And of course, the last thing I'll say is not to say that that person that's low performing doesn't also need some quote unquote intervention, although I hate that word when it comes to humans. But, that person also might need some training or skill or some guidance. But it's very possible that I just have not been clear on my expectations, and that's a gap in the structure.
I love this systems thinking. It reminds me of a book which has really been a kind of bedrock book for me called Analyzing Performance Problems, which came out like several decades ago. But it's a really good read, and it provides a simple kind of flow chart to diagnose and correct these problems. And you're right. Before you get to the skills, you have to address those systemic things. Providing feedback and setting expectations is important, but organizationally, sometimes uh, we incentivize bad behavior. So we need to take a look and say, are our employees experiencing positive consequences for negative behavior or negative consequences for positive behavior, or perhaps there aren't any consequences for behavior. And we need to address those because you can do the training, but if your organization structure is set up in a way that negative behavior is promoted and positive behavior is punished, then it doesn't matter how much training or skills development you do,
The system
because
always wins,
the system will win,
right?
right? So
Because you can coach
you got
that
to fix the
individual,
system.
put them back in that dysfunctional system, and they just get pulled right back into that orbit.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that, sometimes is hard to do because, sometimes those structures are challenging to unwind and they take some time and they may take money. And they could have impacts on people's uh, attitudes and behaviors, especially when it comes around, like, for example, changing compensation structures. If you're saying, okay, we're not getting what we want or need out of the performance of these individuals, so we're going to change our approach to compensation. Man, people get really protective of how they're compensated, and unless they see it as immediately favorable to them,
Yeah.
then they will push back hard. You know, and so sometimes it's easier said than done to change the system's thinking. And I'm curious, in your work, Ethan, that you've done with organizations, how prevalent are the systems thinking challenges in the organizations, and how do you go about addressing those challenges with the people that you're interacting with? Because that's a big job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How prevalent are the kind of system gaps or issues? Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think in every organization, in my organization, there's system gaps and challenges. I think that's the dynamic nature of a system. Is it you'll never have a perfect system that completely does everything you always want it to do. And yeah, that's a lost cause to think that you can get it perfect, because again, things are changing, the environment is changing. So I think there's always gaps to look at there. I think the one thing that I am clear about with leaders and managers I'm working with is taking a systems approach to solving problems is not quick. All right. And we want to move quick. And I hear this all the time. What's the easy fix? What's the quick fix? And it's like, we can talk about that and it will be a band aid fix. And you might experience some relief for some time. But are you looking to build a sustainable organization? You have to look at the, at the system. And so, it's prevalent, and it just takes organizations and leaders that are committed to slowing down to speed up in a sense, right? One example I'll give is, and this is kind of a classic systems thinking example, but I've seen it happen in an organization I was working with a couple of years ago, which is a sales team. So the values that they were espousing in the organization is collaboration, right? We want collaboration. It's on all the posters with the mountain in the background on the walls and stuff
Right.
like that. And,
Yeah.
and all the CEO speeches. Yet they look at the sales team, and how is their compensation set up? It is set up as when I succeed, I get compensated. And that created a competitive environment. It created people hoarding information. And so, again, because I had seen this situation before just in the literature, I could easily point out that, well, I mean, if you want collaboration, why not base your compensation on collaboration? And so that was, I wouldn't call it a quick, easy fix because it takes time to implement those things. But it was one of those things that it's like, hey, that's kind of low hanging fruit. And what that took is just the leaders to be able to sit back and say, yes, we are going to look at this through the lens of incentives and systems and do the hard work to get there. So it takes effort. And I think that's the bottom line.
I'm going to throw something out here. I agree with you, Ethan, that the system will take time to shift, but that initial shift can actually happen quite quickly. So, for example, if you will take your example of the conversation you had with, I don't know what we want to call him, the jerk.
That's fine for now. Yeah.
You can have that exact same conversation with a system. And that team coaching approach is the fastest growing segment of coaching today, because coaching individuals without coaching the system, again, creates those problems that we've been talking about. If you can help the system become aware of itself, they can just as proactively, part of the mindset that you need to have, that you had with this individual, you called him smart. He was a high performer. So he was worth saving, right? I mean, somebody that you valued in the organization. If you look at individuals within a team, we have this mentality that people are whole, they are meaning well, they have it within them to excel. People want to be on a winning team. So if you have this positive intent, even if there's a dysfunction in the system, you can create an environment where you create awareness, where you're not coaching individuals, but you're coaching the entire system. And it's a skill set that's very, very powerful. That can cause a shift very, very quickly. Then you add everything else that you're adding on top of that, which is ongoing support and training, and making sure you're rewarding the correct things, that there's not perverse incentives, and that's really magic. And so there is hope. But rather than just working on all the individuals on the team, hoping that's going to fix the team, you can do that, but you're actually working on the system, and it is. I've learned this over the last 12 years, and it's magic, and it's. I've made many mistakes in coaching individuals, and like I said before, just focusing on the individuals, but once you create this team coaching approach, it's pretty powerful. I want to talk about. Sorry, did you want to respond to that?
I just think that's great. I got so many follow-up questions, but maybe more
we'll talk.
Yeah.
I want to ask you. I love. It's so important what you're doing, and really focusing leaders on just things that they can instantly apply out the door, like we said, and immediately put to work. When there's disagreements, and there's disagreements a lot. I mean, you gave the example of someone building trust by giving candor another, but thinking that was a lack of trust. How do you how do you get people to listen with respect in disagreement? You
Mm.
know, it's there's always disagreements in the workplace, but in society as a whole right now, we have so many disagreements. How can we get better as leaders and as humans at listening to each other when we disagree?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Disagreement and conflict are not inherently bad. And I think we would probably agree on that, I would assume. Yet I think as human beings, we tend to have an aversion to it, right? So it's, disagreement is part of the human nature and it's part of what we need to be successful organizations, successful families, successful communities. We need to be able to disagree with each other because that's how we reach better outcomes, get make better decisions. And so, this is kind of echoing something you alluded to earlier, Spencer, but I don't know if you two have noticed, but there seems to be a vibe in the culture right now, that there's a shift away from assuming good intent. I see this a lot on LinkedIn now where I'm active, maybe overly active. But, it's just kind of this idea that, hey, we shouldn't assume good intent, right? That's setting you up to be a fool. You're going to get burned. Not everybody has good intent. And I push back so hard on that. Like, I do think that the vast, vast majority of people have good intentions, right? They do mean well. We might not like how they approach things or their behaviors. We might not even like their worldviews or understand their worldviews. But they want very similar things in life than we do, right? They want to be happy, they want to be successful, they want connection, they want meaning, they want purpose, right? This is our shared humanity. And so when I hear, don't assume good intent, that's not a good principle for teams to be operating from. I ask, well, what's the alternative? Is the alternative to assume bad intent of everybody? What is that going to do for us? Right. And I think by assuming good intent, whether or not that person actually had good intent, maybe they are manipulating purposefully or not. The reality is, when I assume good intent, when I go into a conflict with somebody or a discussion with somebody, I am going to be more likely to exercise curiosity. I'm going to try to understand where they're coming from because I'm assuming that they're coming from a good place. If I'm not exercising that, then guess what? I'm going to be here to prove myself right to win, and we're not going to be able to reach an agreement. So this is a mindset piece, and there's behaviors and skills, but I always start there.
Keep
What do you
pushing
think, Dan?
back hard. Keep pushing back hard. Did you get roasted for that online?
A little bit, yeah, a little bit, but I'm okay with that.
I love it.
I do too, because um, we're living in an age of cynicism. And the challenge there is that even if you are trying to do the right thing, your actions and behaviors can be interpreted by the other party, as you said, as just being manipulative. Like, this person really doesn't care about me. My boss doesn't care about me. My boss cares about results. And my boss is telling me to do these things, not because he cares about me as a person, but he just wants something from me. And
Mm.
um, and then it's viewed more as transactional rather than sincere. And so the question that I have to you is, in an organization, how do you overcome this cynicism? Because you're right. I see it in my own work where people are just very, yeah, they just look at everything, like, eh, a very skewed perspective. And that's not necessarily easy to overcome. So how do you overcome cynicism? Uh, Even if your actions are sincere, but they're being interpreted as being manipulative.
Yeah. They did this study a couple years ago, and they basically took individuals that were kind of on opposite ends of the political spectrum with each other, and they kind of asynchronously shared the other person's worldviews, so that they could both see that they very much disagreed on these worldviews. And what they did in this experiment is they brought these people together and they gave them some questions, some prompts that were very curiosity driven prompts, and they had a conversation. And guess what? Those people walked away not necessarily now agreeing with the other person's worldview, but they rated those people much more um, desirable, kind, that they like them, and they're much more likely to say, I don't agree with where they're coming from, but I understand. And in many of these cases, these people maintained their friendship for years past the experiment. And so this isn't rocket science, I think, at the end of the day. Like, human connection, human conversation goes so far in overcoming cynicism around each other. And I'm a big believer in, Patrick Lencioni's five dysfunctions of a team model, and just the understanding that trust is the foundation for a successful team and a successful organization. And it behooves us as organizations and leaders to systematically build in time where our team members are just talking with each other, right? Sharing about experiences they've had in life, challenges they've had in life. And what we find is we're much more similar than we are different as human beings. And, I mean, there's tons of research to indicate that just that type of, whether you want to call it ice breaking or team building, whatever, those type of like sincere interactions build trust and respect with people. And I think so often in the busyness of an organization, we say that's a nice to have, not a need to have those type of interactions and conversations. And I wholeheartedly disagree. It's a need to have. And this also means that we get off our Zoom where our screens are blanked out in meetings and stuff. We find time to interact in person. And if we can't do that, we at least turn our cameras on. I mean, there's just so many kind of low hanging fruit here to start building that connection with people.
Do you remember, Christian, when COVID happened, when we started this podcast? One of the things that you really keyed in about one of the benefits that Zoom had was we could start seeing people in their natural habitat, in their gardens, in their homes, and we could get a little more sense of who they were as people, instead of just as coworkers and machines. And I think that's really important in building trust, is we have to see people as whole and complete and not as just cogs in a machine. And
Yes.
and that, people have lives outside of work, and we get to acknowledge that. And that speaks to your go slow to go fast, right? I mean, what happens when you take the time to know somebody and their family, what's going on at home? What happens when somebody has an issue and they can come talk to you, and you can solve that together? What happens to their commitment and engagement to you and your leadership and your organization when they know that they're cared for and loved?
Wow.
It just goes to a whole nother level. And sometimes it's like, well, we don't have time for that. But you know you can't afford not to, is what you're saying, and I agree with you.
Yeah. Pay now or pay later, right?
Yeah, no, 100%.
Yeah.
You're going to pay for it one way, and the best way to pay for it is how do you build trust? Well, invest in not money, invest time. And that's the challenge. And it's one of the things that I was going to ask you. You talked about having one-on-one follow-ups. You need to make sure that you're structuring your organization. Right now, we're with the Gallup information that came out, manager stress and anxiety has just gone through the roof. Since 2002, manager engagement has gone from 31% to 22% in 2025. So the 2025 data just came out a week and a half ago, and 2 weeks ago. And this is what we're seeing, is that managers are managing more complexity, bigger teams. They're implementing AI and individually being more productive, but they're dealing with complexities of actually integrating AI into their systems that is making their lives right now more stressful, more complex. Christian, I don't know if that's accurate from your perspective, but their lives are hard right now, and they need some mercy, and we need to make sure that we're structuring our organization that they're not spread so thin that they can't give their time and attention and, I'm going to say, love to their direct reports. Christian, I'd love to hear what you think, but
I would love to. We could go on for hours about this, but we're running up against the time here,
oh, I
Spencer. We got to
know.
get to the lightning round still. So why don't you kick us off with our lightning round, and then we'll wrap this up. But yeah, I think this conversation could keep going for hours, personally.
Ethan, yeah, thank you. Sorry for I mean this is such important stuff that you're talking about. So you got me on a soapbox. I'm sorry about that, but
No, it's great. I mean, hey, stay up there on that soapbox. And I just want to briefly say before the lightning round, I love how you brought in love. I'm not at all shy in my own leadership to bring in love, and like love is an ideal, right? Like when we kind of feel that and approach that in our day to day as leaders, it totally shifts how we're going to show up. And so again, there's an hour more conversation.
I've had mentors that taught me that, and it changed my world, and it's not transactional, it is truly transformational when we, and there's lots of different kinds of love, but care and anyway. All right, here we go, Ethan. All right. One word that defines a great team.
Trust.
Listening or speaking, which matters more?
Listening.
Most underrated leadership skill.
Oh, most underrated leadership skill. Okay. Showing care and respect. And yes, that could be broken down into a skill.
Yes. Feedback is a skill or a mindset?
Both.
One habit every team should build.
Receiving feedback non-defensively.
Biggest mistake teams make with communication.
Well, okay. First thing that comes to mind for me is too much email versus talking, like, the good old-fashioned way.
Couldn't agree with you more. Substitutes for face-to-face, trust building, pressing of the proverbial flesh. There we go. One word that describes high performance.
Resilience.
Trust is built faster or slower than people think.
That's a good question. I think that it's built. It can be built faster than people think if approached appropriately.
I agree. We think it can be destroyed in a second, and it can, but people. Anyway, we could talk forever. One behavior that changes team culture instantly.
Learning a group of behaviors. So I might be cheating here, but learning a set of skills and behaviors to handle your angst or negativity versus other people, rather than gossiping or spreading that negativity around, and what we call, avoiding triangulation.
Finish this. Great teamworks happen when?
We commit.
Who has the best clam chowder in Seattle?
Oh, I'm the wrong person to ask about clam chowder. Not a big clam chowder fan. Sorry. I can tell you the best fish and chips, if that's all right.
Okay, best fish and chips.
All right. Pacific Inn Pub. Shout out to Pacific Inn Pub. Best fish and chips in Seattle. Yeah.
That was awesome. We've now gotten to the top of the hour, so time for us to wrap it up here. I wish we could keep on going, but Ethan, it's been a pleasure to have you here with us today. If listeners, viewers, they want to connect with you, learn how you could potentially help them and their organizations, what's the best way for people to contact you?
Yeah. Well, first, gentlemen, thanks for the conversation. This was fun. It's like talking to two good buddies, even though we've only talked for the first or second time here. I digress. Where can you find more about me? Honestly, just go to my LinkedIn, follow me on LinkedIn. You can find my website through my LinkedIn. And I will just say that I'm very rarely promoting anything on LinkedIn. I'm mostly just trying to share lessons that I have learned, often the hard way through leading and managing. And I just feel that, one of my purpose is to help managers be as skilled as possible and create well-being in other people's lives while building high performance.
You're obviously skilled, and I love your humility and the approach that you take.
Oh,
Yeah, and I'll
thank you.
second that. Spencer, you've been helping organizations build high performing teams for decades. If organizations or individuals who lead organizations are interested in learning more about how you can help them, how can they reach out and connect with you?
You know what? LinkedIn. And then when you connect with me, I'm going to introduce you to my good friend Christian, who you got to be connected with on.
LinkedIn, yeah. Look, everybody voting for LinkedIn here. So LinkedIn's the place. Well, this has been a fascinating hour of conversation, Ethan. We really appreciate you sharing your time and your knowledge and experience and stories with us today. Listeners and viewers, we're grateful for you too. Please like and subscribe to our podcast. We'll catch you again soon.